An aging farmer gave his last seed to a hungry traveler, and the weight of that decision hung in the air between them like the promise of rain in a cloudless sky. Jacob Mercer's weathered hands trembled slightly as he extended his palm, revealing the small, unassuming kernel, the final remnant of hope from a season of devastating drought. The morning light slanted through the worn curtains of Jacob's farmhouse, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden beams. At 72, his body bore the testimony of decades spent bent over soil that had once been generous but now lay cracked and barren around his modest homestead. The land had been in his family for 4 generations, but this might be its final chapter. Jacob's arthritic fingers curled around his coffee mug, the warmth doing little to dispel the chill that had settled in his bones these past months. Ever since Martha had passed, the winters seemed longer, the silence of the old house more pronounced. Their children had scattered to cities years ago, calls becoming less frequent as their lives filled with their own families and concerns. Through the kitchen window, he surveyed what remained of his farm. The fields that should have been lush with wheat now stretched like an abandoned canvas, painted in shades of brown and gray. The drought had claimed most of his crops, and what the lack of rain hadn't taken, the unusually harsh summer sun had scorched beyond salvation. Last week, he'd sold his remaining livestock, 3 cows and a handful of chickens, to pay the property taxes. All that remained was a single seed from Martha's heirloom tomato plant, the one she'd tended with such care on their back porch. She'd saved seeds each season, but last year's illness had prevented her from planting. This lone seed was all that remained of her garden, of her touch upon this land. Jacob had been saving it, though for what, he couldn't quite say. Perhaps as a memorial, a final connection to Martha. Perhaps as a desperate, foolish hope that next season might be different. A knock at the door startled him from his reverie. Visitors were rare these days, especially with the main road having been rerouted 5 miles south of his property the previous year. The young man on his porch looked like he'd walked through hell to get there. Dust coated his clothes, his backpack hung limply from one shoulder, and his face bore the hollow look of someone who hadn't eaten properly in days. His dark hair was matted with sweat, and his eyes, a startling green, held both wariness and exhaustion. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," the stranger said, his voice cracking with thirst. "My car broke down about 3 miles back. I've been walking, trying to find help. Could I trouble you for some water?" Jacob hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. "Come in, son. Got more than water if you need it." The young man, Elias, he introduced himself, sat at Jacob's kitchen table with the careful movements of someone conserving energy. Jacob set before him a glass of water, some leftover cornbread, and a small bowl of beans he'd been saving for his own dinner. "Thank you," Elias said, eyes brightening at the sight of food. "I haven't eaten since yesterday morning." As Elias ate, his story spilled out between grateful bites. He'd been traveling across country after losing his job and apartment in the city. His parents had died years ago, leaving him with no real home to return to. He'd been heading west, chasing vague promises of work in California orchards, when his ancient car had finally surrendered to years of neglect. "Shouldn't have tried to make this journey without proper preparation," Elias admitted, shame coloring his voice. "But I didn't have much choice. Landlord gave me 3 days' notice, and I had nowhere else to go." Jacob nodded, understanding desperation when he saw it. He'd felt its cold fingers around his own heart these past months. "You can use my phone to call for a tow," Jacob offered, "though service out here isn't what it used to be." Elias reached for his pocket, then froze. "My wallet," he whispered, patting his jeans with increasing panic. "It must have fallen out when I was walking." His face crumpled. "Everything was in there, my ID, my last $40, my credit card." Jacob watched the young man's shoulders sag under the weight of this new misfortune. It was a posture he recognized too well from his own reflection in the bathroom mirror each morning. "You can stay the night," Jacob heard himself say. "Tomorrow we'll figure something out." That evening, as they sat on Jacob's porch watching the sunset paint the barren fields in deceptively beautiful hues of amber and gold, Elias asked about the farm. Jacob found himself talking more than he had in months. Words spilling out about the good years, about Martha, about the drought that had stolen everything except his memories. "I always wanted to learn farming," Elias said quietly. "Growing up in apartments, the closest I got was a few sad herbs on the windowsill. There's something, I don't know, something honest about coaxing life from the ground." Jacob snorted softly. "Honest, maybe. Forgiving, no. Land remembers your mistakes longer than any person could. But it must reward faithfulness too. Elias suggested, his eyes tracking a hawk circling in the distance. It did, Jacob acknowledged, the past tense hanging heavy in the air between them. For a time, later, as Jacob prepared a simple supper, he noticed Elias standing by the kitchen window, staring at the small pot containing nothing but soil. Martha's pot, where he'd been contemplating planting that final seed. Was going to plant something there? Elias asked. Jacob hesitated. Got one seed left. My wife's heirloom tomato. Been holding on to it, though don't rightly know why. Nothing grows in this drought. Elias's stomach growled loudly, and embarrassment flashed across his face. The meager lunch hadn't been enough after days of hunger. Something shifted in Jacob then. A memory of Martha chiding him gently for his occasional stubbornness. No point in saving something if you never use it, Jacob. Gifts are meant to be given, seeds meant to be planted. Reaching into his shirt pocket, Jacob removed the small envelope containing the seed. With deliberate movements that belied his internal conflict, he held it out to Elias. Here, he said gruffly. Take it. Elias looked confused. Your seed? But you said it was your last one. From your wife's plant. Ain't doing any good in my pocket, Jacob replied. And you look like you could use something to hope for more than I could. An aging farmer gave his last seed to a hungry traveler, and the weight of that decision hung in the air between them, like the promise of rain in a cloudless sky. Elias accepted the gift with shaking hands, understanding the magnitude of what he was being offered. Not just food, but heritage, memory, possibility. I'll plant it for you, he said, voice thick with emotion. Right here, if you'll let me stay long enough to see it grow. Jacob shrugged, affecting indifference, though his heart pounded strangely in his chest. Suit yourself, but don't expect much. Nothing's grown here in almost 2 years. That night, under the silver light of a full moon, Elias planted the seed in Martha's pot with a ceremony that made Jacob both uncomfortable and oddly moved. The young man's careful hands worked the soil with unexpected skill, and he spoke softly to the earth as if introducing himself to a living thing. You're talking to dirt, Jacob observed from the doorway, arms crossed over his chest. Elias looked up, unembarrassed. My grandmother used to say plants respond to voices, that they grow better when they know they're wanted. And are they? Wanted, I mean. Elias's hands stilled in the soil. Everything wants to be wanted, don't you think? Jacob didn't answer, but the question followed him into dreams filled with Martha's laughter and fields once green with promise. Morning brought an unexpected sound, rain pattering against the roof. Jacob woke with a start, disoriented by the gentle drumming that had once been so familiar, but now seemed foreign to his ears. He found Elias already awake, standing on the porch with his face turned up to the gray sky, eyes closed and a smile playing at his lips. Been 18 weeks since we had more than a sprinkle, Jacob said, joining him. Good timing, Elias replied, opening his eyes. For the seed. The rain continued steadily through the day, soaking into the parched earth with a sound like a collective sigh of relief. By unspoken agreement, Elias stayed another night, then another. His car remained abandoned on the roadside, but neither man mentioned it. On the third morning, a tiny green shoot appeared in Martha's pot. Would you look at that? Jacob murmured, bending close to examine the fragile stem. Something tight loosened in his chest at the sight. Elias beamed with disproportionate pride. Told you it wanted to grow. As the days passed, Jacob found himself falling into a rhythm with the younger man. Elias was eager to learn about the farm, asking questions that Jacob hadn't considered in years, seeing possibilities where Jacob had only seen failure. They repaired the chicken coop together, and Elias convinced Jacob to use some of his savings to buy a half-dozen hens. Fresh eggs will save you money, he argued practically, and give us something to trade with neighbors. United States. The word slipped in so naturally that Jacob didn't challenge it. The tomato plant thrived with inexplicable vigor, growing faster and stronger than any Jacob had seen before. Within weeks, it required a larger pot than a trellis. Its stem thickened, leaves spread wide and vibrant green, and small yellow flowers appeared in clusters that promised fruit. Never seen anything grow like that, Jacob admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, the lengthening plant now reaching for the roof. Martha's tomatoes were good, but they weren't whatever this is. Elias shrugged. Some seeds just need the right time. The first tomato appeared in late June, swelling from a withered blossom into a small green orb that gradually took on a golden hue rather than the expected red. By July, the plant was bearing dozens of fruits, each the size of Jacob's fist, with a color like sunshine captured in solid form. Not like any tomato I've ever seen, Jacob said suspiciously when the first one ripened. "You sure that was Martha's seed?" "It was the one you gave me," Elias replied simply. "Maybe it cross-pollinated with something before it was saved." When they finally sliced into the first golden fruit, the aroma that filled the kitchen was intoxicating, sweet and complex, with notes of citrus and something undefinable. The flesh inside was firm and meaty, with few seeds. "My God," Jacob whispered after the first bite. The flavor was extraordinary, rich and sweet with a perfect balance of acidity, unlike any tomato he'd tasted before. Within days, neighbors who hadn't visited in months began appearing at Jacob's door, drawn by rumors of the remarkable plant. They brought trades, fresh bread, preserves, tools, all for a chance to taste the golden tomatoes. Mrs. Abernathy from 2 miles over, who fancied herself an amateur botanist, examined the plant with growing excitement. "Jacob Mercer, do you have any idea what you've got here? This isn't just any tomato. This is something entirely new. A variant I've never seen documented." Word spread beyond the neighboring farms. A produce buyer from the city drove out to see for himself, offering to purchase seeds at a price that made Jacob's eyebrows shoot up toward his hairline. "We should name it," Elias suggested as they collected the precious seeds from selected fruits, carefully washing and drying them. "All new varieties have names." Jacob's throat tightened unexpectedly. "Martha's Gold," he said after a moment. "That's what we'll call it." The miracle of the plant extended beyond its fruit. As summer progressed, Jacob noticed something strange happening in the field nearest the house. Where the ground had been watered with runoff from the tomato plant, new growth appeared, vibrant and strong, pushing through soil that had seemed dead for seasons. Soil samples sent to the Agricultural Extension Office came back with bewildering results. The earth around the tomato plant showed significantly improved microbial activity and nutrient profiles compared to the rest of the farm. "It's like this plant is healing the soil somehow," the extension agent said, scratching his head in confusion. "Never seen anything quite like it." By August, Jacob and Elias had planted the first field with seeds from the original plant, using careful irrigation methods to maximize the limited water supply. The seedlings thrived, each one growing with the same vigor as their parent. Orders for Martha's Gold. Tomatoes began coming in from restaurants in 3 counties. A food magazine sent a photographer to capture the striking image of golden fruits, hanging heavy against the backdrop of Jacob's weathered barn. One evening, as they sat tallying the first real profits the farm had seen in years, Elias grew quiet. "I should probably be moving on soon," he said, not meeting Jacob's eyes. "My car's fixed now, and you've got things under control here." The words hit Jacob with unexpected force, like a physical blow to his sternum. The thought of returning to the silence of the empty house, of mornings without Elias's enthusiastic plans, of evenings without their easy conversations, left him feeling hollow. "You could stay," Jacob said, the words emerging gruffer than intended. "Farm's too much for one old man. Could use a partner who knows something about miracle tomatoes." Elias looked up, hope and wariness battling in his expression. "You mean that? A real partnership? Got no children interested in this place," Jacob said. "Needs someone who sees what it could be, not what it was. Seems to me that's you." The smile that broke across Elias's face was like sunrise after the longest night. I'd like that very much." As summer yielded to fall, the first full field of Martha's Gold tomatoes produced a harvest beyond anyone's expectations. The improved soil began to spread outward from the original planting, a renewal that agricultural experts came from universities to study and document. Jacob found himself explaining to bewildered scientists that it had all started with a single seed, the last one he'd had, given away when he had nothing else to offer. One crisp October morning, Jacob stood at Martha's grave in the small cemetery beyond the orchard. He'd brought one of the golden tomatoes, placing it gently against her headstone. "Wish you could see it, old girl," he said softly. "Whole place is coming back to life. Got a partner now, too, young fella named Elias. Think you would have liked him." He paused, throat working against emotion. "Your tomato did something miraculous, Martha. Or maybe it was giving it away that was the miracle. Still trying to figure that part out." The breeze rustled through nearby trees, sending a shower of autumn leaves spiraling around him in what felt oddly like an embrace. That evening, as the setting sun gilded the rows of thriving plants in light that matched their fruit, Jacob and Elias sat on the porch steps, comfortable in a silence built of shared purpose. "Utananum. You know," Elias said finally, "I never told you why I was really traveling that day." Jacob raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. I was running away, Elias continued. Not just from losing my job, but from everything. I'd given up, honestly. Thought I had nothing left to offer anyone. He looked out over the fields, now alive with promise. I was planning to keep driving until I ran out of road or reasons. Then my car broke down right when I needed it most. Or maybe exactly when I needed to stop running. Jacob nodded slowly. Funny how things work out. You ended up exactly where you needed to be, right when this old farm needed you most. When we needed each other. Elias corrected gently. As darkness fell, the first stars appeared above fields that would, come spring, be fully planted with crops nourished by soil renewed through some alchemy of science and miracle they might never fully understand. Jacob thought about the weight of a single seed in his palm, how giving away his last connection to Martha had somehow brought her spirit more fully back to this land. How an act of kindness offered from the edge of despair had sprouted into salvation neither man could have imagined. An aging farmer gave his last seed to a hungry traveler. And from that seed grew not just an extraordinary harvest, but a second chance for two souls who had forgotten how to hope, and a legacy that would flourish long after they were gone. Sometimes Jacob reflected as the night deepened around them, the most precious seeds we plant are the ones we give away.